I am Bob Jackson, a humble man. All I ever dreamed of was a life without problems, with a loving wife, children, and a cozy home. Now I drive a Ford F-150, a cherished legacy from my late father. He gave it to me 10 years ago, and even then it was already 15 years old. My father was a professional carpenter and farmer, while my mother worked as a maid at the Route 66 hotel on the outskirts of Bells, Tennessee. I grew up in this unusual town, where life was simple and everyone knew everyone. Bells was so small that when you passed the Welcome to Bells sign, you could immediately see the message on the other side, "Thank you for visiting." Bells allowed me to experience the heart of small-town life. I attended elementary, middle, and high school, all while working at the Bells Mini Market, which was in the same building. Growing up, I was known by the nickname BJ, and my sister, Carrie, protected me from the bullies. She had connections to a local bandit, which made me untouchable to troublemakers. My life was simple, and that was all I wanted. School was tolerable. I had a small group of friends, a girlfriend, and a modest car that served its purpose. Maybe it was time to tune it up, but my real talent was hunting, a skill I had perfected since childhood. From the moment I could walk, or rather stumble, I had a gun in my hands, even if it was just a cork pistol. This sparked my interest in firearms. When an army recruiter came to our small town, I knew in my heart that this was my chance to become an Army Ranger. My father wasn't thrilled, but he understood the importance of me following my own path. So, after graduating from high school, I enlisted. I was stationed at a base in Bragg, North Carolina, where it quickly became both my training ground and home. The first time I met my sergeant, he told me, "Get back on the bus and go home." He thought Ranger School was for adults, not little boys like me. I wasn't tall, barely over 170 centimeters, and I wasn't heavy either. But I didn't mind. I was used to being underestimated. Everything changed after that first night in the field. The sergeant realized his mistake and no longer underestimated me. By fate's hand, it was the sergeant who ended up in front of my M60. It was 3 a.m., and I had spotted his movement in the forest. During Ranger School, I exceeded all expectations and became the best student in my class. I felt immensely proud, knowing I had made my parents proud too. When my Army service ended, I faced many challenges, but I kept my thoughts to myself. During my free time, I worked toward getting an accountant's degree. That's when I met Brenda. She had blonde hair, mesmerizing hazel eyes, and a presence that drew attention wherever she went. She often received tempting offers, but she knew what she wanted in a man. Calm, balanced, and most importantly, someone she could easily control. When she met me, she realized I was exactly what she was looking for. The only problem was that I knew she was out of my league. I acted shy and reserved, quickly looking away whenever she smiled at me. But one day, while I was waiting in the chapel, Brenda noticed me and decided to act fast. She sat behind me on a bench, and I expected her presence. I quickly turned around and asked, "Yes, how can I help you?" Her surprise was replaced by a warm smile that instantly melted my heart. And just like that, our love story began. From that moment on, we became inseparable, deeply connected to each other. When I introduced Brenda to my family, they were thrilled. She had an MBA, was fluent in 4 languages, and had taken first place in her class. The whole town of Bells couldn't believe my good luck. Bells, with a population of about 225, was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business. My father was happy for me, but he also gave me a word of caution. He advised me to appreciate and love Brenda as she deserved, but also to maintain my self-respect. "Don't tolerate disrespect," he said. "Find a balance between satisfying her desires and keeping your own dignity." I never gave Brenda everything she wanted, and sometimes I had to be firm and say no. My father's words echoed in my mind, reminding me to find a balance in my relationship. I swore an oath to him that day, and I stayed true to my promises. Time passed quickly, and before I knew it, 10 years had gone by. I was running a successful audit business, and Brenda had become a mid-level sales manager at a reputable supermarket. We had no children, but we were a perfect example of a harmonious married couple. To me, everything was going as well as possible. One day, after completing an audit at a client's factory, I decided to surprise Brenda by inviting her to lunch. This was my first visit to her office, as I had always respected her professional space and never wanted to disrupt her work. Brenda, in turn, never called me while at the office. If she was going to be late, she would either call or leave a message at home. I finally found out where her office was located and headed to her secretary's desk outside the office. When I stopped in front of her desk, the secretary asked, "Who are you?" I quickly answered, "I'm Brenda's husband." She giggled and said, "Go away." Brenda's husband is a tall, attractive blonde, 6 feet 3 inches, and he works on the floor above. I was confused, but I insisted, "Could I trouble Mrs. Jackson for a moment?" My words were ignored as the secretary quickly contacted security. They arrived immediately, grabbed me, and began escorting me out of the building. Just then, Brenda walked out of her office, oblivious to the situation. She saw me being led away, but her focus was elsewhere. She didn't even seem to notice that the real Brenda's husband was described by the secretary. It was at that moment that I discovered Brenda's secret relationship with her colleague, John. Both Brenda and John had successfully deceived everyone at work, pretending to be a married couple. Things quickly spiraled out of control. As I was escorted out of the building, I rushed to my apartment, feeling overwhelmed. At first, the weight of the situation crushed me, but my pragmatic side soon took over. I realized Brenda's affair wasn't just a fling. If her colleagues believed she was married to John, their affair had likely been going on for a while. On my way back home, my phone kept ringing. I saw that it was Brenda calling. A mix of emotions overwhelmed me, but I chose to ignore it. Frustrated, I threw the phone out of the car window, hoping to rid myself of its incessant noise. When I arrived at my apartment, the chaos in my mind was mirrored by the disorder around me. As I began packing my things, it finally hit me. Brenda never wanted children with me. I felt a deep sadness, but it didn't change the reality of the situation. Brenda had made a fool of me, and I couldn't tolerate it. Brenda's secretary had likely informed her with some amusement that some unremarkable man had come up to the desk, claiming to be her husband. They probably laughed at the thought of someone like me being married to someone as superior as Brenda. I had always seen myself as a simple man, content to fulfill my destiny, but Brenda had always viewed herself as above me. She finished her work day and went home, unsure of what to do next. She had made a mistake, but she was confident I would want to listen to her and that she could come up with a lie I'd believe. When she arrived at the house, she noticed my car parked in its usual spot. She opened the door and called for me, but there was no answer, just silence. Brenda searched the whole house, but I was gone. Surprisingly, she remained calm. She didn't shed a tear. To her, I had fulfilled my purpose, and she was ready to move on. She even felt relieved that she wouldn't have to explain everything to me. 2 weeks later, Brenda had lunch with John and several vice presidents of the company. During the meal, a man dressed as a waiter approached her. He introduced himself and asked, "Are you Brenda Jackson?" Brenda replied nonchalantly, though her curiosity piqued. The man handed her a package and simply said, "You've been served." Brenda's face flushed with embarrassment. She snatched the envelope and rushed to the ladies' room. The audacity of it all. Being served in front of everyone during dinner infuriated her. When Brenda returned from the restroom, she was relieved to realize that Don had managed to resolve the situation. He had informed the vice president that it was simply an insurance case, sparing her from further humiliation. Brenda was grateful for Don's timely intervention. 3 months later, Brenda found herself sitting in a lawyer's office, studying divorce papers. She didn't ask questions but soon stumbled upon some unpleasant facts. From the lawyer's explanations, she discovered that I had successfully sold my company, a move Brenda had been very interested in. Naturally, she demanded to know the identity of the buyer. My lawyer calmly responded, "It was Carrie, your sister." Surprised, Brenda asked at what price the company was sold. The lawyer answered, "She paid $2." He then added that Brenda would receive her share in the mail once the divorce was finalized. A smug grin appeared on his face as he said this. Confused and offended, Brenda turned to her lawyer and asked, "How could he do this? The company is joint property, which means I have a right to it." Disappointed, she started screaming, asking why I wasn't there and growing louder by the minute. My lawyer looked at her with a cheerful grin, then grabbed his briefcase, handed her a business card, and quickly left the office. Meanwhile, I had returned to my late father's house in Bells to discuss a potential real estate deal. After my father's death, the farm had been jointly owned by Carrie and me. There were rumors that Nissan was planning to open a plant in Tennessee, and during a conversation, the vice president of Nissan's development department showed interest in building the plant on our property. Our farm, with over 200 acres, was ideal for the project, meeting Nissan's size criteria and offering convenient access to highways and a railway line. The entire town understood the importance of this opportunity. A new Nissan assembly plant in Bells would attract other businesses to the area. Carrie and I reached a mutual agreement for a $35 million deal, which we decided to split. Additionally, Nissan signed a 6-year consulting contract with Carrie after the land deal was completed. During the negotiations, the vice president asked about my future plans after selling my business. I told him I hadn't thought about it much, but he offered me the position of head of accounting at the new plant. Surprised by the offer, I needed time to review the documents. However, I was inclined to accept. At the same time, Brenda and Don received word of Nissan's plans to build the plant in Bells. They imagined themselves as an influential couple in the town, but for that to happen, Brenda needed to finalize the divorce. She agreed to my settlement terms and asked her lawyer to expedite the divorce process. Within 45 days, we were legally separated. Soon after, Brenda remarried not to Don, but to another man in a quiet ceremony at a wedding chapel in Las Vegas. I heard rumors about it through unofficial channels, but though I disapproved, I chose not to react. Meanwhile, I began working at the newly established Nissan factory, giving it my all. My efforts didn't go unnoticed, and before long, I was climbing the corporate ladder. Within a short period, I became vice president of finance and administration, a role that also included overseeing human resources. I developed a professional relationship with Henry Masagi, an experienced Nissan executive. Henry appreciated my straightforward approach to management, and we formed a strong, respectful friendship. When Henry requested a meeting in his office, I wasn't sure what to expect. To my surprise, he informed me that Nissan had acquired a department store chain next to Bells, and he wanted me to evaluate it. He explained that the business needed to be assessed, especially focusing on the payroll and staff at the head office. Back in my office, I conducted an extensive analysis, which led me to draw up recommendations for how to handle the financial crisis. In the end, I concluded that to stop the ongoing losses, we would need to lay off about 10% of the management team and nearly 15% of the hourly workforce. After Henry received my plan, It was time to break the news to the management team. All the managers were gathered in a designated room, where folding chairs were set up for their convenience. At the front, 2 large tables were set up on either side of the podium. Brenda and Don had hoped to speak with Henry privately before news of the reorganization spread, but Henry asked them to wait for my arrival, without mentioning my last name. When I suddenly walked into the room, Brenda and Don were stunned. The surprise on their faces didn't go unnoticed by Henry. In response, Henry casually exchanged a few words with me in Japanese. I grinned and replied in Japanese, leaving Brenda bewildered by my knowledge of the language. Despite being considered a simpleton, I had a few unexpected surprises up my sleeve. Brenda quickly came to her senses and realized the gravity of the situation. The fact that I could communicate with the management team sent from Nissan, Japan, and speak in their native language was a clear sign that something was very wrong. Both Brenda and Don understood that things were unfolding in a way they hadn't expected. I proceeded to explain the reasons behind the lack of severance payments for Brenda, Don, and the other dismissed middle managers. This revelation shocked them. They knew that the top management and company owners had received significant financial benefits, known as golden parachutes, when they sold the company to Nissan. Unfortunately, the company had exhausted its funds, and Nissan had to inject a large amount of capital just to keep production running. As a result, the dismissed managers could only rely on minimal state unemployment benefits, which were meager at best. I also informed the middle managers about the upcoming layoffs and shared the decision Henry and I had made. 25% of the middle managers would be let go instead of reducing the overall workforce. Henry added that HR would conduct individual meetings with each manager to determine who would stay with the company. We were told that the interviews would be scheduled, and the venue would be announced in advance. As I was leaving, Brenda tried to get my attention, but I ignored her and continued my conversation with Henry, completely oblivious to her presence. Don turned to Brenda, expressing his bewilderment. "This is an at-will state," he said. Brenda, with a worried expression, replied, "Yes, that means they can fire us for any reason, or no reason at all." Don, confused by her lack of understanding, thought for a moment before speaking again. "Brenda, you need to find a way to win back the favor of the village guys," he said. Brenda looked at him incredulously. "How exactly do you suggest I do that? Do I have to fix this situation? I'm not sure it was you who deceived him. It's your duty to correct it. Besides, if necessary, go to extreme measures. It shouldn't be a big problem for you. You've been deceiving him for years while you were married." Brenda listened, her feelings of humiliation growing. Over the years of their marriage, Don had often used her for his own purposes, treating her like a commodity when he needed someone to implement his plans or satisfy his desires, ignoring her opinions and treating her as though she belonged to him. That evening, Brenda and Don arrived at a 25-acre ranch, following instructions they had received. The ranch's owner, Henry, was rumored to be incredibly wealthy. As they rang the doorbell, the door swung open, and they were greeted by a charming southern beauty. "Greetings," she said with a delightful southern accent. "My name is Pam. Come in and make yourselves at home." Inside, they were immediately taken by the luxurious house, which resembled the grand mansions often shown on television. As they moved further inside, they noticed that their colleagues were inspecting the rooms, laughing and excited. Many knew this meeting marked the end of their time at the company, but tonight they were celebrating, a moment to enjoy before the inevitable change. The delicious aroma of barbecue filled the air, adding to the festive atmosphere. Brenda and Don spotted Henry and made their way toward him. Brenda, impressed by the house, complimented, "Sir, your house is simply magnificent." Henry grinned at the compliment but quickly corrected her. "Oh no, this isn't my house." At that moment, I walked up to them, glanced in their direction, and once again spoke to Henry in Japanese. Brenda, growing more anxious, realized I hadn't noticed her at all. Feeling a bit offended by my lack of acknowledgement, she asked, "Bob, what did you just say?" I looked at her briefly and responded, "I asked Henry about the house. I doubted it belonged to me, since it clearly couldn't be mine." Henry, smiling mischievously, turned to Brenda and said, "Actually, the house does belong to Bob." At that moment, Pam approached us and asked me to have Jeff bring over 30 more bottles of wine and 5 cases of beer from the wine cellar. I agreed and went to the intercom to give the instructions. Henry, noticing the changes, commented, "You've really renovated the house beautifully." Pam smiled and replied, "Thank you very much, Henry. Your kindness means a lot to me." Curious, Henry asked about the newly installed pool, and Pam eagerly led him outside to show him. Brenda and Don followed, intrigued by what was happening. As they stepped outside, they were amazed by what they saw. A massive pool set in a grotto, a stunning marvel of design. Henry tactfully inquired about the value of the house, prefacing his question gently. Pam answered honestly, "It's worth about $4 million. Carrie lives in a house that costs around $2 million, by the way." Curiously, Pam asked, "Speaking of Carrie, how is she doing?" She continued, "She recently had another baby, and this one is adorable. Every time I see Carrie's baby, I tell Bob we should think about starting a family too." Coincidentally, I walked in just as she made that comment. Joking, I patted her on the back and said, "Don't worry, dear. Soon we'll be expanding our family. But for now, let's focus on enjoying the evening together." Don had made a foolish decision by contacting the wife of a jealous man, which led to serious consequences for him. It's no surprise that Don had a miserable evening. In the end, both Brenda and Don found themselves on the list of employees being let go. Pam, however, eventually fulfilled her long-awaited wish. She gave birth to twin girls, and a few years later we had a son who looked just like me. A year after that, Don and Brenda separated and eventually divorced. One evening, Don returned home with several colleagues from work, unaware that Brenda had overheard him describing her as a person when they first met. The next morning, Don found a note from Brenda that read, "I chose myself, not you." Don, indifferent to Brenda's care, had always viewed her as nothing more than an object for his own pleasures. Tragically, just a month later, Don was found dead in his bed. Tests revealed that he was HIV positive. Meanwhile, Brenda, now living in poverty with another smug and aggressive man, faced a life of horror. According to Carrie, who often saw Brenda at the supermarket where she worked as a cashier, Brenda looked terrible. Carrie noticed bruises on Brenda's face and hands, which made it clear that my ex-wife was a victim of domestic abuse. I couldn't bring myself to care, though. To me, she was dead, and I felt no sympathy for her. She had made her own choices and paved the way for her own misery. Carrie, being kind-hearted, often spoke about Brenda's situation, but I always asked her not to remind me of her. One day, Carrie called me, crying bitterly. She told me that Brenda needed help. She was in terrible condition. Her abusive partner had beaten her severely, leaving her unable to move or even sit. She was now disabled and completely alone, with no support. Perhaps you'll think of me as cruel, but I didn't feel sorry for Brenda. After hearing my sister's distressing news, I asked her not to mention my ex-wife's name to me ever again. Story 2. I have an incredible story to share about my wife, Jennifer, and me. We've been together for 9 years, since we were school friends. Our relationship feels like something straight out of a fairy tale. We met at a school dance, and from that moment on, we were inseparable. People saw us as the perfect couple, but deep down we had different dreams for the future. I aspired to become a lawyer, buried in law books, while Jennifer dreamed of Hollywood and wanted to be an actress. I supported her dreams, but I couldn't deny that I felt anxious about how we would go down our separate paths. While I was buried in legal textbooks, Jennifer tirelessly attended auditions across the country. Despite being 2 years older than me, she graduated a year after I did because she was in a grade below me. It always confused me because whenever I asked, she'd get defensive about it. Looking back, if I had known the truth, perhaps we would have reconsidered our relationship right then. But don't worry, the reason will become clear later. After high school, I went abroad to study law, and we entered a long-distance relationship. Though I had my doubts, I was determined we would make it work. We talked every night, and I visited her during holidays and special occasions. Sometimes she was unavailable, but I didn't think much of it. After graduation, Jennifer broke unexpected news. She wanted to study acting in Europe. Suddenly, the distance between us felt even greater, an entire ocean between us. I couldn't help but feel anxious, but Jennifer reassured me with promises of endless phone calls and late-night conversations. Years passed. Jennifer continued pursuing acting in Europe, while I stayed focused on my law studies. I met many interesting people, including women, but our communication remained purely friendly. As I progressed in law school, I passed the bar exam and secured a job at a small law firm specializing in corporate contracts. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it paid well and I felt stable. Meanwhile, Jennifer returned to the U.S. and struggled with a few rejections before securing some small acting roles. Eventually, we got married. Despite the years we had been together, I still felt the weight of the decision. We moved out of our cramped apartment and bought a house in Virginia. The price was steep, but with my stable job and solid credit history, we managed to secure a mortgage. However, disaster struck. The CEO of my firm was involved in an embezzlement scandal, which led to the collapse of the entire company. My job vanished overnight, and we were left with significant debt. If we couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments, we risked losing our new home. When I told Jennifer, we cried together, devastated. Then we pulled ourselves together and started brainstorming solutions. We considered selling the house or finding part-time jobs. Jennifer even took a job as a hamburger vendor. But nothing seemed enough. With the mortgage deadline looming, we were on the brink of financial ruin. Just when we were at our lowest point, Jennifer surprised me with incredible news. She had signed a major contract with a television network. She was tight-lipped about the details, saying everything was top secret, but the promise of a steady income helped us breathe a little easier. Her new job was more than enough to cover the mortgage, and our financial woes seemed to vanish. Life seemed to return to normal, and I felt like I was on cloud 9. I almost wanted to ignore the cracks that were starting to appear in our marriage. But time passed, and nearly 6 months went by without the constant fear of losing our home. We were finally free of that burden. 3 months later, I found a new job at a small law firm that focused on public interest law rather than corporate affairs. The salary wasn't as high, but I felt like I was really making a difference in people's lives. Meanwhile, Jennifer's acting career was taking off. Her salary continued to grow, and life seemed to be moving in the right direction. As time went on, Jennifer's career in acting grew every year, but she kept her professional endeavors shrouded in secrecy, providing little information about her roles. Despite the success, I couldn't shake the growing suspicion that something was off. It seemed to me that wanting transparency about what she was doing wasn't unreasonable, especially since her acting career had largely contributed to paying the mortgage. It felt fair to want at least some insight into her work. However, I brushed off my suspicions, convincing myself they were just paranoia. I decided to focus on more important matters, my new job and personal development. I even started a new diet and began going to the gym 3 times a week. Jennifer, too, seemed to be making an effort, dressing flawlessly and always applying makeup before leaving the house. But strangely, our intimacy started to decrease, and we rarely went out on dates anymore. I was left with a growing feeling of confusion and detachment. Seeing her look effortlessly perfect, I couldn't help but wonder what was really going on. I understood that the television industry had high demands, but I didn't know what might be hidden behind her immaculate appearance. Looking back, the whole situation almost seems unreal, like a story made up. Things took an unexpected turn when one day, an anonymous benefactor decided to reveal Jennifer's secret to me. When I arrived at work, I found a plain white envelope neatly hidden in my desk drawer. On the front, my name was written, followed by the words, "Urgent message," in bold letters. Curiosity mixed with apprehension as I carefully opened the envelope, and a series of photographs spilled out in front of me. My jaw dropped in disbelief. In the photos, Jennifer was in an environment eerily reminiscent of a strip club, engaged in activities that shattered everything I thought I knew about our reality. At first, I convinced myself this was a misunderstanding or a prank. Perhaps the photos weren't clear enough to confirm anything. I clung to the hope that this was all a mistake, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling anymore. No one came forward to calm my worries, which only made my fears grow. I knew I had to get to the bottom of this, even if it meant confronting uncomfortable truths. I decided to hire a private detective, using some savings I had accumulated from my previous job. It felt like a desperate measure, but I needed answers, even if I wasn't ready for what I might find. I couldn't bring myself to spy on Jennifer by visiting strip clubs or something worse. And if my suspicions were groundless, it would be unfair to expose Jennifer to unnecessary stress. But deep down, I knew I had to know the truth. The detective's thorough investigation quickly led to the origin of the photos. A day later, a detailed report with high-resolution images was placed on my desk. The truth was now undeniable. Jennifer, the woman I had been married to for 9 years, was involved in an elite club catering to lovers of intimate entertainment. My heart ached, a strong pressure forming in my chest, making it difficult to breathe. The shock of the revelation hit me like an icy wave. 9 years of marriage, dreams of starting a family, and a paid-off mortgage. All of it now seemed uncertain. I felt completely blindsided, betrayed in a way I could never have imagined. That evening, I sat alone in the living room, waiting for Jennifer to return, hoping she would offer an explanation for the shattered trust between us. Hours passed before I heard the sound of the key turning in the lock. When she entered, I saw a flash of surprise on her face. I was usually asleep by the time she got home, so my being awake was unexpected. In hindsight, I should have recognized this as a wake-up call, but sometimes clarity only comes with hindsight. Taking a deep breath, I asked her directly, "Why did you work in a club for people seeking intimacy?" Her reaction was immediate. She froze, as if caught off guard. "No, I don't work in such a place." "Why would you say that?" she asked, confused by my accusations. She couldn't understand why I had drawn such conclusions. Despite her outburst, I remained calm, insisting she be honest with me. I couldn't let this go without addressing it, but Jennifer continued to deny everything, casting incredulous glances at me, as if doubting my sanity. Not willing to let her dismiss my concerns, I pulled out the incriminating photos and presented them to her, determined to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I laid the photos out one by one, carefully watching Jennifer's reaction as her eyes scanned each image. I noticed her face losing color, and an overwhelming sense of guilt radiated from her, like the intense heat from an oven. At that moment, all my doubts about the authenticity of the photos evaporated. To my surprise, Jennifer didn't try to lie or defend herself anymore. Instead, she collapsed in front of me, sobbing uncontrollably. Through her tears, she confessed that her involvement in this club was a desperate attempt to save our home, to secure our future together. She expressed deep shame and remorse, acknowledging how far she had sunk. She begged for my understanding, explaining that she couldn't bear for me to find out the truth and wanted to keep it hidden. But despite her tearful pleas, the feeling of betrayal only intensified. It disturbed every instinct in me. Disappointment and frustration grew within me as I pointed out that her fear of disappointing me didn't justify betraying me in this way. Her apology seemed like a weak attempt to cover up a deep wound, like a band-aid on a broken bone. She tried to justify herself, saying she never wanted to hurt me, that she never intended for me to find out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could she think such an excuse would be enough to make up for the pain she caused? I turned my questions toward the future. I asked her what her plans were, reminding her that I had recently started a new job and that we could have handled the mortgage if she hadn't resorted to these late-night outings. She seemed confused, unable to give a satisfactory explanation. That was when it all became clear to me. I didn't need to hear any more. Everything fell into place like pieces of a puzzle. The designer brands hanging in her wardrobe, the luxurious decor in our home, the $1,000 items I had once overlooked. All of it suddenly made sense. How had I not seen this before? The reality hit me like a punch to the stomach. Jennifer was no longer the modest actress chasing her dreams. She had become a highly paid object of desire. The one question that hung in the air was, did she enjoy all the money, the fame, and everything that came with it? She remained silent, and that silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally, she broke the silence, asking, "What should I do? Do you want me to quit this job?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled to figure out how I could trust her again. At that moment, we stood there in silence, like two stone statues in the crumbling monument of our marriage, desperate for a miracle. My life felt like a tasteless joke, a cruel twist of fate. Then, she begged for a second chance, promising she would quit her job the very next day. I'd love to say that I remained firm and cold, resolutely putting her out the door. But the truth is, I struggled with my emotions. Part of me wanted to drive her away. Seemed like the right thing to do, and at times I came close. Divorce was a word I couldn't bring myself to say. The deep-rooted connection between us, the shared experiences that had shaped us, didn't allow me to let go that easily. Against my better judgment, I decided to give her a second chance, but cautiously. The next day, despite her objections, I insisted on accompanying her to the club to see for myself that she had truly resigned. When we arrived, I saw her boss, and I couldn't help but clench my fists at the sight of his smug grin. After the emotionally intense ordeal, we left together, seeking solace in our shared journey toward healing and reconciliation. I took a week off work to focus on restoring our connection. We revisited the moments of our youth when we were teenagers in love, remembering the little things, playing pranks, and laughing. It was a nostalgic feeling, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe our relationship could be saved. Strange as it may sound, it was thanks to Jennifer's previous work in that terrible place that we were able to keep our house. As the traditional breadwinner of the family, it was hard for me to accept, but she quit right before my eyes. Now we had a chance to devote more time to each other and renew the desire to rebuild what had been strained. Another week passed, and Jennifer actively began searching for new job opportunities. Meanwhile, my law firm assigned me to a high-stakes lawsuit worth millions, requiring me to travel to Indiana. The prospect of long-distance travel again stirred feelings of anxiety, But with Jennifer's reassurances, I found the courage to accept the job. At the airport, we said a passionate goodbye, making promises to each other, hugging, and kissing tightly. As I hit the road, I was filled with excitement about my new professional role, but also anxiety about trusting Jennifer again. Faced with a choice, either trust my wife, who had remained faithful during my absence, or terminate our marriage, I decided to trust her. I understood that some might condemn my choice, but I believed in the possibility of redemption and growth for both of us. Yet, just when things seemed to be falling into place, Murphy's Law made its presence felt again. The universe appeared determined to test me further, challenging my resolve. I admitted to myself that I was still weak, that I had much to learn about resilience and strength. Life had changed dramatically, forcing me to face new lessons. In the first few weeks of my new job, representing the interests of teenagers on the brink of imprisonment, I realized that real satisfaction came from my work. It felt meaningful to protect these vulnerable young people, giving them a chance at a better future. It was the job I had always longed for. Despite the heavy workload, I made an effort to call Jennifer every evening while traveling. But after a few weeks, I began to notice changes in her accessibility and responsiveness. Sometimes, she couldn't reach me or didn't respond at all. She explained this by saying she was busy job hunting or running errands, and I took it at face value. Then, one day, I received a mysterious text message. It was from the same anonymous person who had warned me about Jennifer's secret life. Just the sight of this message caused a surge of anxiety, and my heart started pounding. Without wasting time, I quickly responded and arranged a meeting at a local restaurant for the following Tuesday. The days leading up to that meeting felt painfully slow, but eventually Tuesday arrived. After finishing work at 5 p.m., I headed to the restaurant, arriving a little earlier. I glanced through the menu, though my mind was far from focused on the food. My attention was on the mysterious guest who was about to reveal more truths about my life. By 6 p.m., an elegant woman entered the restaurant, and as she approached my table, I immediately recognized her. With confidence, she introduced herself. "My name is Nancy, and you must be Jessica's husband." I confirmed her assumption and felt a surge of curiosity. How did she get these damning photos? Sensing my intrigue, Nancy sighed heavily and began to speak, her voice filled with memories. "We used to work together at the same club," she said. "We worked the same shift and often spent breaks together. I worked there for 3 years before Jessica came. I remember helping her settle in, completely unaware that she was hiding her marital status." Nancy paused, reflecting on the past. "I asked her if this was really the job she wanted," she continued. Without hesitation, she confidently confirmed it, and foolishly, I believed her. Nancy went on, describing how Jessica's behavior began to change. At first, she would go home right after her shift, but then she started spending more time with the visitors and staff, especially the actors. She seemed to be in close contact with them, and I couldn't help but notice how her style had changed. She began dressing more and more luxuriously. After a brief pause, Nancy took a deep breath and shared an even more shocking revelation. "One night, Jessica invited me to a nightclub after work. We drank more than we planned, and I had to take responsibility for her intoxication. I ordered an Uber to get her home." Nancy continued, "During the ride, Jessica asked me why I decided to work at the club. I told her about my financial difficulties and my failed attempts to find another job. When I asked her the same question, she initially said it was for the mortgage payment, but then she admitted that she now worked there because she enjoyed the luxurious lifestyle. But then, Nancy dropped a bombshell that shook me to my core. While intoxicated, Jessica said something that I couldn't ignore. She said, "I work the same way as my husband." The weight of those words hit me like a brick. Nancy admitted that she had taken the secret photos to bring the truth to me. Using social media, she had tracked down my workplace and discreetly left an envelope with evidence in my booth, hoping that it would lead to some kind of resolution. As I processed the revelations, the memory of our first meeting flashed before me. It all started with us, full of hope, but now, it felt like Jennifer had only been living for herself. The truth struck me like lightning, and I couldn't help but regret not trusting my intuition earlier. I scolded myself for being weak, for dismissing my doubts as self-doubt. Nancy noticed my silence and patiently waited for me to respond. With gratitude for her honesty, I sincerely thanked her before sharing that I had made the difficult decision to file for divorce. Yet, amid the turmoil, a sense of anxiety lingered. Just as I was preparing to move forward with the divorce, another shocking blow came my way. A letter arrived, bringing with it an unexpected turn of events. To my disbelief, Jessica bypassed me and accused me of abuse, mistreatment, and even infidelity. The accusations seemed absurd, especially since they were supported by a photo of Nancy and me taken in the restaurant. It became clear that Jessica had been spying on me, invading my privacy in an attempt to manipulate the situation. Overcome with rage and anxiety, I realized I had to remain calm in the face of these unfounded accusations. Despite the available evidence and the constant public slander from Jessica on social media, I remained confident in the truth. I decided to fight back. Jessica may have started this battle, but I was determined to make her regret it. I rehired the private detective and gathered all the evidence I could against my deceitful wife. I carefully saved backups of everything on my phone and computer, preparing for the impending battle. Once everything was in place, I made a bold move. I contacted Nancy, asking her to testify on my behalf during the divorce hearing. Her knowledge and first-hand evidence would be invaluable in debunking Jessica's false accusations. Since Jessica had secretly filmed our conversation, she was using it to accuse me of infidelity and other baseless offenses. After a long day of suspense, Nancy's response finally came. She agreed to testify for me. I immediately sent her the details, informing her that the hearing was scheduled for the following month. With the date set, I spent the night carefully preparing for the impending confrontation. The days leading up to the hearing passed slowly, but finally, the day arrived. I picked up Nancy, and we drove to the courthouse in Virginia. When we entered the courtroom, I made sure Nancy sat quietly and settled in. I had devised a strategic plan. I wanted to keep her presence a secret until it was her turn to testify. If Jessica could blind me with lies, I thought it only fair that she be surprised by the truth. At the courthouse, I met with my lawyer, who joined me shortly after Nancy and I had settled in. Soon, Jessica arrived, accompanied by her lawyer and a young girl who looked remarkably like her. The sight of them stirred a storm of emotions in me, but I remained determined to resist the deception that had destroyed our marriage. Jessica's lawyer opened with an absolutely shocking speech. He accused me of the same infidelity I had accused my wife of, claiming that I had forced her to quit her job, deliberately prevented her from finding a new one, and even made false accusations against her when I got a more lucrative position. He also claimed that I sought to deprive her of any alimony, leaving her without financial support. But the most outrageous accusation was yet to come. The lawyer alleged that I refused to support our daughter, who supposedly needed financial assistance. The absurdity of this accusation was beyond anything I could have imagined. It was clear that Jessica's lawyer was trying to paint me as the villain, no matter how far-fetched or unfounded the claims were. The shock in the courtroom grew as Jessica's lawyer demanded that I be obligated to pay alimony after the divorce. I was completely stunned by this demand. Something didn't add up. Jessica had never mentioned having a daughter, and her family had never hinted at the existence of a child. We had never even considered starting a family, let alone raising an 11 or 12-year-old girl. As I tried to process these shocking revelations, a memory from my school years flashed in my mind. Jessica's bewildered reaction when I asked about her plans for the future. It suddenly dawned on me. She must have dropped out of school to hide her pregnancy. This realization hit me like a brick. All these years, I had believed that we had no secrets, that we were completely transparent with each other. But now, confronted with this revelation, I couldn't help but question everything I thought I knew about our relationship. Despite her grand aspirations, she had kept this crushing secret hidden in plain sight all these years. The shock of the revelation left me with no time to think. The divorce proceedings were already underway. Our moment had come. It was time to stand before the judge and make our case. My lawyer cleared his throat, ready to address the court. The allegations of infidelity on my client's part have no basis whatsoever. The photos and questions presented do not provide grounds for such accusations. On the contrary, we have concrete evidence indicating that it is the opposing party who leads a debauched lifestyle. He continued, "We ask the court to consider evidence A, B, and C, clear and indisputable proof of my client's spouse's open confession to deceptive behavior motivated by financial interests. These actions contradict the traits one would expect from an honest and trustworthy person. It is embarrassing that the opposing counsel distorts the facts and my client's actions in this manner. We strongly dispute the claim that the defendant needs financial support. Document D clearly indicates that she has a lucrative job and is more than capable of supporting herself. Any claims to the contrary are misleading and deserve further investigation. If the opposing counsel insists otherwise, we demand that he provide bank documents as proof of his allegations. The truth will emerge from a thorough examination of the facts. My client has been caught in a web of deception and manipulation, and he wishes to break free without suffering financial loss. We are confident that the court will recognize the validity of this request." My lawyer's words echoed in the courtroom, and the judge paused, allowing everyone to process the information before proceeding to examine the evidence. Each piece of evidence was carefully considered, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Finally, when document D was presented, indisputable proof of my wife's involvement in a luxurious lifestyle, her face drained of color. The weight of the evidence was undeniable, and the reality that she had deceived everyone was felt throughout the hall. The photos presented were clear. They depicted my wife, just a week ago, extravagantly dressed and wearing expensive jewelry while working at the club. This revelation stunned her lawyer, causing doubt even within her own family. The web of lies she had woven unraveled before the court, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of triumph. Throughout this ordeal, I alone had withstood every blow, and each one had proven merciless. While I regretted giving her another chance and choosing the path of weakness, I felt no remorse for standing up for myself now. It was my turn to take control of my life, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me any longer. The final, most devastating blow came when my lawyer called Nancy to the witness stand. As Nancy rose, my wife's face turned even paler, and I couldn't help but smile at the turn of events. With each question from my lawyer, Nancy confirmed her identity and admitted that she had worked at the same club as Jennifer. Under relentless questioning, Nancy revealed how Jennifer, while intoxicated, shamelessly flaunted her newfound wealth and admitted to lying to her husband. The courtroom was captivated by Nancy's testimony, which further exposed the depth of my wife's deception. When my lawyer asked about the photo of Nancy and me, she calmly explained that she had contacted me to inform me of Jennifer's infidelity. Nancy made it clear that she had nothing to fear, as she had already resigned from the club. She also clarified that the photo in question was taken to provide evidence of Jennifer's lies. The audio recording presented in court was irrefutable. It proved there was no infidelity on my part. As the tape played, my wife's expression grew darker and more miserable. It was clear she had assumed I had no proof, and without it, maybe I would have fallen victim to her deception. But the recording served as a powerful tool to expose her lies and reaffirmed my desire for the truth to come out. When the truth was revealed, and there were no shadows left to hide it, my wife's facade completely crumbled in front of everyone. The audio was the final blow. There was no longer any room for doubt. As the recording ended, the judge turned his stern gaze to my wife and her lawyer, then addressed both sides in a measured tone. Both sides have presented their arguments regarding alimony. If you have anything further to add, please do so before I make my decision, the judge said. I braced myself for any outburst of anger from my wife, but to my surprise, she remained silent, burying her face in her hands. The weight of the truth had clearly hit her, and she had no words left. My wife's family, as well as her lawyer, cast disappointed and disgusted glances at her. A heavy silence descended over the courtroom as all eyes were on her, and the full scope of the truth began to sink in. Finally, the judge broke the silence. As for alimony, he began, I believe that the plaintiff does not have sufficient grounds to demand payment. His words lingered in the air, marking the final decision in this tumultuous process. The judge granted the divorce petition, and in an instant, I was officially divorced. I was free from the lies, the manipulation, and the betrayal. As I left the courtroom, a wide grin spread across my face, reminiscent of a child who had just gotten away with something mischievous. From that moment on, I never spoke to or saw Jennifer again. There was a bittersweet quality to this moment, but in truth, it was primarily sweet. The bitterness stemmed from realizing how much time and energy I had wasted on someone like her. At the same time, I couldn't help but feel an immense sense of gratitude for my private detective. He had truly been my savior, guiding me through the avalanche of lies and deception and revealing the truth that ultimately set me free. He not only saved my wallet but also spared me from an emotional catastrophe. If there were a Nobel Prize for saving gullible husbands, he would undoubtedly have won it. This victory was dedicated to him, the one who tirelessly listened and worked to untangle the web of deceit. I will always be grateful to him. Later, I discovered that the woman I had loved and trusted so much had given birth to a daughter when I was studying abroad. The child was the product of a brief encounter with a visiting man whom she no longer saw after their intimacy. My ex-wife's parents had raised the child in secret, keeping the truth from me. Now, with the full extent of her deceit revealed, I hoped that her family, along with everyone else, would sever ties with her. I also sincerely wished that in the future, she would live a difficult and challenging life. After all, I believed she deserved it.